I believe that most men find out that their wife is having an affair by coming home at the wrong time, eavesdropping on a careless conversation, or finding physical evidence. It was much easier for me. My wife sent me an email. In fact, Anne didn't write to me intentionally, although Freudians might say otherwise. I assume that her mail program automatically suggested my name as the intended recipient, and she clicked on it without checking. This is, of course, easy to do, especially if you are in a hurry. Anyway, I was stunned to receive a note from my wife, after 18 years of marriage, entitled about yesterday. Since yesterday was a fairly ordinary Wednesday, I wondered why Anne had emailed me about it. Opening the message, I read, "Darling, I just wanted to tell you again how wonderful yesterday was. You made me feel something I haven't felt in years. I just can't wait until next week. Your lady." I was at work all day on Wednesday, and as far as I knew, so was Anne. We didn't even talk on the phone that day, although I remember that she was unusually cheerful when she came home in the evening. The disgusting betrayal was obvious, and my first thought was to meet her in the evening and demand an explanation, or more likely, a confession. But I am a logical and methodical person. It didn't take much imagination to suggest that she could deny the meaning of the letter, come up with some alternative explanation, or just pass it all off as a joke. What could I say then? Besides, my unfounded accusations would have alerted her, and most likely I would not have found out anything. After thinking about it, I decided to wait. Firstly, it would be interesting, even funny, to see if Anne realizes her mistake and decides to explain herself to me. If not, then I have already been warned and can correctly use the information about her next date. Anne sells real estate, so her opening hours are usually irregular. She came home much later than me tonight. I watched her closely, but I found her behavior absolutely normal in every way. If she knew that the letter was sent by mistake, she didn't show it. I, in turn, did not even hint that something was wrong. The whole evening passed in routine. But when we went to bed, I felt that sleep was not coming. Instead, I lay there analyzing my problem from all sides to see if I could untangle the knot. There was, of course, the possibility that there was a completely innocent explanation for this. If that were the case, I would not only make a fool of myself by acting rashly, but I would also harm our marriage. I loved my wife, and the last thing I wanted was to do anything that could push her away from me. Well, if the letter really testified that the affair was going on, then my marriage was already under threat, and in this case, I would have to take action. The next morning, when I got to work, I went back to analyzing the problem. The upcoming Wednesday should provide some answers. So I contacted a detective agency and arranged for my wife to be followed. If she doesn't do anything unusual on Wednesday, it won't exactly ease my fears, but I'll definitely feel better. However, if my fears are justified, then at least I will find out the truth and start taking appropriate measures. Having done everything I could do at that moment, I put it aside and got back to work. Apparently, next Wednesday was no different from any other. Anne and I, as usual, left for work and returned home late at night at almost the same time. There was nothing in her appearance or behavior that seemed abnormal or unusual to me. I was sitting in my office, reading my favorite collection of short stories by Edgar Allan Poe, and tried my best to hide any signs of anxiety and suspicion. On Thursday morning, I had an appointment with a detective agency to find out the results of their surveillance. Although I'm not a very emotional person, I can still read emotions in others. When I entered the office, the detective in charge of my case avoided meeting my eyes. I knew right away that I wouldn't like what he was going to tell me. It was just as I feared. The wife left the real estate agency where she works, and the detective followed her to a cheap motel near the airport. He handed me photos of her meeting a man there and entering a room with him. The timestamp on the photo showed 13:52. About 2 hours later, Another photo showed them leaving the room together, holding hands. "I'm sorry," the detective told me. "It is always very unpleasant for us to confirm your suspicions. What would you like us to do for you now?" I thought for a minute. I need your help again. It looks like this motel is their regular rendezvous place. If this is true, is there any way to take photos of what is happening in the room?" The detective didn't hesitate. "We have a lot of experience in obtaining such evidence. You will probably have to pay for the cooperation of the motel manager. But if it is acceptable to you, I think we can guarantee fulfillment." I nodded. "The proof will be paid." I returned to my office, but this time, to my surprise, I found that I could not concentrate on work. Now that all doubts were removed, my ability to think seemed to have disappeared. In the end, I gave up trying to work and focused on what I had learned. Wiping my eyes, I began to make plans. In addition to confirming my wife's infidelity, I understood why Anne accidentally sent this treacherous letter to me, and not to him. It turned out that I knew her lover. It was our neighbor Mark Bradshaw. Since my name is McBishop, the email program must have suggested my name after Anne typed the first two letters. It's very careless of her not to double check. I thought, but probably emotions tend to distract lovers. Knowing the identity of Anne's lover further increased my sense of betrayal. Mark and his wife Bobby were our friends. We often had lunch at each other's house or went to the movies together. And I never noticed a special spark between Anne and Mark. Was I blind? Or were the two of them good at the art of deception? Anyway, I knew I had to do something. The question was, what exactly? For several hours, I mentally went through various options for action. At times, revenge fantasies flashed through my head, followed by scenarios in which I imagined myself begging Anne not to leave. Questions about why the affair began and how long it lasted tormented me. Anger and self-pity were intertwined in me. Finally, I decided. Not only did I know what I wanted to achieve, but I had a pretty good plan for achieving my goals. My plan will include 2 separate courses of action that will occur simultaneously. I thought of them as divide and conquer, separate 2 lovers and win her heart again. As a dividing part of my plan, I'm using my knowledge of Anne and, to some extent, Mark to drive a wedge between them. If I'm lucky, I'll be able to interfere with their relationship until they decide to break up. The second part will include an all-out campaign to win back Anne's love by becoming the perfect husband. At the same time, when I show her the downside of her relationship with Mark, I hope to demonstrate the benefits of resuming a relationship with me. I made extensive notes for myself, listing possible actions for each part of my campaign, planning their timing and working out the interdependencies so that each of them complements the other. When I finished, I saw that an essential element for both was the need to keep them in the dark about my knowledge of their relationship. Obviously, this will require restraint on my part, but I felt I could do it. I know how not to show emotions. I decided not to start my campaign until I receive another report from the detective agency. But there were steps I could take during that time to prepare. First, I bought a recording system for our home phones, as well as a voice-activated recording device that I hid in Anne's car. Tapping our home phone closed this communication channel, and although I couldn't tap her mobile phone, I felt that the car was the most likely place for her to call Mark. I wasn't worried that she would call him from work. The agency had an open plan office, so I reasoned that she was unlikely to have a conversation with her lover in a place where she could so easily be overheard. My next step was to get into Anne's email. Her home computer was already set up to access her work email. She protected her system with a password, but I knew where she kept a list of her passwords, and it didn't take me long to gain access. I quickly arranged for copies of all the messages to be forwarded to my address. As soon as I got access to the email, I soon found out that their affair had apparently only been going on for a month or so. This suggested that their relationship was still in the honeymoon stage. My task was to finish this honeymoon as soon as possible. Having completed the preliminary work, I could only wait for the detective agency to prepare photos of their next meeting. In addition to the photos, they surprised me by presenting video and audio. It was an unpleasant surprise. Gathering my courage, I began to watch them make love. What I didn't expect was a display of tenderness and, dare I say, love between them. The depth of their closeness hurt. This made me wonder if my plan had a real chance of success. But in the end, I have nothing to lose. I will continue the plan. My wife is not very patient and does not tolerate disappointments well. I was hoping to use this weakness against her to disrupt the relationship she had established with Mark. At the same time, she is very romantic, and I felt that this could be the way for another part of my plan. Having a copy of all her emails gave me an undeniable advantage when it came to planning my intervention program. Their next exchange of letters gave me everything I needed to start sharing on the first part of my plan. Are we still on Wednesday? Anne? Absolutely. One time, one place. I can't wait, Mark. On the day of their next date, I drove to Anne's office, parking around the corner so I wouldn't be seen. As soon as she came back from lunch and went inside, I casually walked past her parking lot, looked around again to make sure no one was there, and then ducked next to the car. It only took me a minute to unscrew the valve cover on the tire and let the air out. Then I went back to my car and drove back to my apartment. I wondered what she would do without men in the office. Sure enough, 20 minutes before she was supposed to meet Mark at the motel, Anne called me. Can you help me? Don't worry about anything, baby, I said soothingly. The job is pretty light today, so I can fix your car. I just need to finish one thing here, and then I'll come right over. Of course, I waited another 15 minutes before leaving, which meant I wouldn't get to her agency until almost the scheduled time of Anne's meeting with Mark. She was waiting impatiently by her car. Sorry, it's so late, I apologized. It took longer than I expected. While she was pacing back and forth in despair, I slowly and methodically changed her wheel. I parked my car right behind her to load her flat tire into the trunk and take it to repair. Of course, it also prevented her from leaving until I did everything. By the time I put on the spare tire, put the flat tire in the car, and returned after washing my hands, it had been more than an hour since she was supposed to meet Mark. I apologized to her again for being late and said I hoped it wouldn't affect her relationship with the client. He just has to understand, she said resignedly. While I was changing her tire, I heard her cell phone ring several times, but although she checked it, she didn't talk. She probably saw that Mark was calling and didn't want to talk to him in my presence. My suspicions were subsequently confirmed when I returned to my office and saw an excited correspondence between them. Where are you? I've been waiting at the motel for over an hour, Mark. The car has a flat tire. Anne, you could at least call and let me know. I rented a room, Mark. Mac was here, changing the wheel. Good, I thought. It looks like I've strained their plans a bit. That evening, after dinner, I took Anne to the sofa, where I put her feet on my lap and gave her a foot massage. She looked at me questioningly, because usually she has to ask me about it. I know you've had a rough day, baby, and I just wanted to do something nice for you, I told her. She looked at me to see if I was hinting at something else, but when I continued to smile and work on her legs, Anne relaxed on the couch. Soon I saw an expression of pleasure on my face. And when I continued the massage, the soft moans of pleasure were sweet music to my ears. Not wanting to be intrusive, I waited the rest of the week before taking the next step. And on Monday, a large floral arrangement with a postcard was delivered to her office, on which it was written, "The best wife a man can have." If she felt remorse because of my irony, she hid it well. But that evening, when she returned home, she thanked me warmly and told me what impression it had made on the other women in the office. "But on what occasion? What is it?" she asked. "You've never done anything like this before." "That's right, dear," I said, hugging her, "and that's what I want to change. What if you had a flat tire when you were driving on the highway? It made me think about how dear your love is to me, and I wanted to be sure that you know it." She looked at me searchingly, but after a moment's hesitation, she hugged me and hugged me tightly. "That's so sweet of you, darling. It really means a lot to me." I couldn't help but wonder if she felt guilty. I learned from her email that the lovers are planning to catch up at a special meeting in a few days. I wanted to disrupt their plans, but this time I felt it might be suspicious if I messed up Anne's car again. So I let her go to the meeting place without hindrance, but followed her, staying away so as not to be noticed. While she was entering the room Mark had booked, I drove around to the back of the motel and entered through the side door. The motel was modest enough, and there were no security cameras to record me turning on the fire alarm in the hallway. I waited outside until I saw the guests being driven to a safe place in the parking lot. I didn't notice Anne and Mark, but I knew they must be in the crowd, probably pissed off like wet chickens. Back in the safety of my office, I watched with glee as emails flew between two disappointed lovers. "Anne, what nonsense. I'm so angry I'm ready to scream." Mark, "I'm sorry, but it's not my fault." Anne, "Next time, book some place that won't be a fire trap." Yes, it looks like my Anne, I thought. When she came home from work, I could see that she was still boiling. But her nervousness was replaced by surprise when she noticed that the dining table was covered with linen napkins and our exquisite china. And when she smelled her favorite dish boiling on the stove, she looked at me with mock disbelief. "Who are you? And what have you done with my husband?" she asked with a big smile on her face. "Nothing special," I replied modestly. "I called your office this afternoon, and when they told me that you had an appointment with a client that was delayed, I decided that the last thing you would want to do was cook when you got home." Fear flashed across her face, but she quickly recovered and put her arms around my neck. "That's so sweet of you, darling," she said. "You treat me so well." After dinner, I was determined not to let her help with the dishes. She looked at me with gratitude when I escorted her to the office and turned on my favorite TV show. Returning to the kitchen, I felt her eyes following me and decided that the conquering part of my campaign was progressing well. Whatever doubts Anne might have about her affair, the next letter I intercepted from Mark made it clear that no temporary setbacks would stop him. He wanted to taste my wife's sweet pussy one more time and intended to up the ante to get it. "Mark, okay, no more cheap motels, lady. This time I booked a room at the Hyatt Hotel. We can finally spend time together. Anne, it's much better. See you there at the usual time." Reading their email correspondence, I cursed Mark's persistence and regretted that Anne was ready to continue their interlude. Other measures were required. I waited until noon, the day before they were supposed to meet, and then called the Hyatt Hotel booking office. "This is Mark Bradshaw. I have a room booked for tomorrow, but something has happened, and I won't be able to come. I'm afraid I'll have to cancel the order." "No problem, sir," the clerk replied. "In fact, we have a big conference planned, and your cancellation will help us a lot." I smiled with satisfaction. Having done the deed, I still couldn't resist showing up at Hyatt just to see what would happen. I sat down in a chair with a view of the reception desk and hid behind a newspaper. And indeed, just in time, a married duo appeared, walking hand in hand, chatting and cooing like doves. Their loving mood didn't last long once they found out they didn't have a room. "But I booked a room a few days ago," Mark shouted to the bewildered clerk. "I'm terribly sorry. The poor girl apologized. "But judging by my computer, your order has been canceled." "That's ridiculous," Mark snorted. "Very well, make us a new order." The girl shook her head sadly. "I'm sorry, sir, but the hotel is fully occupied. And unfortunately, because of the Congress in the city, most of the other major hotels are also sold out. But you might get lucky in one of the small motels near the airport." When Anne heard the last remark, her face turned red, and she clenched her fists. While Mark continued to rage at the counter, she angrily pulled his sleeve. "Never mind," she hissed loudly. "Let's get out of here. I'm not in the mood anyway." With these words, she turned and walked to the parking lot, and Mark followed her, trying to calm her down and tossing up options. It was clear that he wasn't having much luck. I waited for them both to leave in their cars before leaving my post in the lobby. My work here is finished, I thought happily. When Anne came home that evening, I stopped her at the door. "Don't even bother to come into the house. We're leaving." Before she could protest, I took her hand and led her to my car, holding the door for her. I walked around the car and got behind the wheel. "What does all this mean?" "What is it?" she asked. "Where are we going?" "I thought you'd have a little surprise tonight," I told her with a smile. With these words, I turned on the radio in the car to some quiet music and continued to drive in silence. She was watching me curiously, trying to guess what I had prepared. She was clearly alarmed when she saw me pull into the Hyatt parking lot. "Why are we coming here?" she asked nervously. "You'll see," I winked. Entering the hotel elevator, I pressed the button for the top floor, and soon we were in the restaurant on the roof of the Hyatt Hotel with its signature rotating dome. I went up to the head waiter and told him my name. "Ah, here you are, just in time," he said. With these words, he led us to a table on the outer edge from where we could admire the lights of the city. "Why did you choose this particular place?" Anne asked suspiciously. "No particular reason. I just thought it would be a great setting for my pretty wife." She smiled tensely at my compliment. "But how did you manage to get us a table? I heard there's a big convention in town today." "Oh, it's not a problem," I said casually. "I called today and booked a table." Anne didn't react to my remark in any way, but I knew that my success contrasted sharply with Mark's fiasco. In fact, I booked a table as soon as I found out about their rendezvous plans. "I took the liberty of ordering," I continued. "I hope you don't mind." She said she was grateful for my concern and relaxed. She was even more delighted when the waiter brought a bucket of ice and a bottle of champagne. After we drank a few toasts, which I made for her, she really cheered up. And when the waiter brought oysters on half a shell, she was delighted. I'm not a big fan of oysters, but Anne loves them. As the main course, the waiter brought a salad of salmon niçoise with black olive sauce. Anne was duly impressed. "I thought you were going to order something heavy, like a big steak," she said with a smile. "This is the perfect option." "I know you like salads, baby," I told her. "Besides, we don't want to eat too much." She looked at me questioningly, but I didn't say anything else. For dessert, the waiter brought 2 bowls of fresh raspberries with a spoonful of whipped cream and liqueur glasses filled with Grand Marnier. It was a perfect completion, and Anne loved it all. When we were driving home, Anne unbuckled her seatbelt and snuggled up to me. It turned out that alcohol and oysters had the desired effect. Besides, I felt that she must be upset and excited after the failures of her last dates. When I got home, I took her straight upstairs to our bedroom. "Why don't you change into your nightgown?" I suggested, "while I do other things." When she turned to the closet, I rushed down the hall to the guest bedroom to make sure everything was ready. When I returned, I was pleased to see that she had chosen a transparent black nightgown that both hid and revealed the curves of her body. I led her down the hall to the guest bedroom, where scented candles were now burning around the open bed. While she stood staring in amazement at my preparations, I approached her from behind and put a sleep mask over her eyes. "Touch and smell will be the only senses you'll need today," I said, leading her to the bed and undressing her. Then I laid her on a fresh linen sheet. "Smell it," I said, waving a bottle of almond butter under her nose. Then I poured some water into my hands to warm her up and started rubbing her feet. She moaned with pleasure when I gave her a short foot massage. But this time, I didn't stop there. Soon I started moving up, paying attention to the muscles of the calves and thighs to make sure she was completely relaxed. Moving on, I also avoided her breasts, working on her shoulders and arms instead. When I got to her fingertips, I gently turned her over on her stomach and repeated the same process up the back of her legs. I firmly but not painfully massaged the muscles of the buttocks and back until she moaned with pleasure again. Her moans turned into a long, drawn-out scream, echoed by my own grunts, until we both exploded and collapsed. When I came to myself, I pulled the mask off her face. Her eyes were closed. She either fainted or collapsed from exhaustion. Taking a deep breath, I picked her up, carried her into the bedroom, and put her on the bed. Then I covered her with a sheet, and she quickly fell asleep. I took a quick sponge bath in the sink before going back to bed. Falling asleep, I was very pleased with how the evening went. Anne and I usually have different schedules when we get up for work, but she got up early the next morning. When I went downstairs, I found that she had already made me coffee and breakfast. When I looked at her, her eyes were sparkling. "Thanks, baby. Last night was really something special for me," she said fervently. "I'm so glad you liked it," I replied. "I know that I will remember this for a long, long time." She smiled at me. I felt that Anne and I were making real progress, but later that day I intercepted an email correspondence that let me know that Mark was still trying to meet her. "Mark, I am very sorry about what happened yesterday at the Hyatt Hotel. I still don't know how they managed to lose my reservation. Anne, I don't know, Mark. Maybe it just wasn't meant to happen." "Mark, don't say that, lady. Let me make it up to you. Is there any chance you can leave on Saturday? Bobby's leaving town, and we could spend the day at our lake house. No confusion with booking, no fire alarm. Just hot love. Anne, Mac always plays golf on Saturdays. I can probably leave while he's there." "Mark, great. I can't wait to touch your hot body again." It was clear to me that my campaign had reached a tipping point. I felt that both divide and rule were gaining strength. But I had to do something this weekend. Otherwise, I would lose everything I had achieved so far. Their new plans presented a real problem for me. There's no way to cancel my golf game. Anne can always pretend to go shopping or find some other excuse to leave. I didn't dare touch her car again. Everything could be lost if she suspected me. And unlike the motel and the hotel, it wasn't easy for me to play with Mark's house on the lake. I needed some way to get Anne to change her plans, preferably at the last minute. Suddenly, a stroke of genius dawned on me. The perfect solution. Moreover, the preparation took only one phone call. I followed my usual routine for the rest of the week, but on Friday night, I sneakily grabbed Anne's mobile phone and replaced the battery with a dead one. If she tries to call Mark this weekend, it will only be through her home phone so that I can listen in on the conversation. On weekends, Anne and I dress rather casually, but when Anne came downstairs on Saturday morning, I noticed with interest that she was wearing a beautiful skirt and blouse. As the time for my departure to the golf course approached, I noticed that Anne was watching me with some apprehension, probably because I hadn't made the slightest move to put on my usual golf pants and shirt. When the usual time of 10 a.m. came, and I wasn't going to leave, it was clear how the wheels were turning in her head, preparing an excuse for why she would need to leave. Finally, she became so impatient that she turned to me. "Aren't you playing golf today? What is it? she demanded. And then the doorbell rang. Anne gave me a puzzled look and went to see who was there. Opening the door, she exclaimed in surprise, "Miriam, what are you doing here?" "Is that how they greet their younger sister?" Miriam asked as she walked through the door. The women hugged excitedly. "Of course I'm glad to see you," Anne murmured. "I just wasn't expecting you." Miriam smiled at me. Here because your wonderful husband invited me. He called me at the beginning of the week to let me know that you have no plans and offered to spend the weekend together. We haven't seen each other for so long that I jumped at this chance." Anne and Miriam were very close to each other. Not a week went by that they didn't talk on the phone. But because Miriam lived 200 miles away, they didn't visit each other often. "It's wonderful to have you here," Anne told her. Then she turned to me. "That's really great, Mac. Now I know why you don't play golf." "Well, there's nothing more important than giving my wife the opportunity to spend some time with her sister," I told them. "And now, lady, I want you to get ready because I'm inviting you to breakfast." Then I looked at them again. "Actually, Miriam, you might want to change into something more elegant than your jeans, but you look great exactly as you are dressed now." Anne looked at herself and blushed, remembering why she was dressed like that. But she recovered quickly. "Why don't you help Miriam carry her bag to the guest room? While she's changing, I'll just make a quick call." I watched her walk down the corridor, and a minute later, I heard muffled curses. She came out holding her unresponsive mobile in her hands. "The damn battery is dead," she said angrily. "Oh, honey, that's too bad," I sympathized. "But you can use your home phone." "Never mind," she said hastily. "In any case, the call is not so important. Now, where are we going to have breakfast?" I spent the rest of the weekend studying with my sisters, trying to make them feel good. When Miriam was going to leave on Sunday afternoon, she hugged me and thanked me on purpose. "You have a special husband," she said to Anne. It seemed to me that Anne winced slightly, but then she smiled and hugged me. "I will," she promised. I was sure Anne had taken the time over the weekend to call Mark, but I wasn't worried. If the call was made on our home phone, I have a recording. After Anne went to bed on Sunday night, I was able to check the recording device. Of course, the call was early on Sunday morning. "Anne, Mark, it's me, Anne." "Mark, where have you been? You didn't show up on Saturday, and every time I tried to call you, your phone immediately switched to voicemail." "Anne, I'm sorry, but there was nothing I could do. My sister unexpectedly arrived in town on Saturday morning and my phone was dead. I haven't had a chance to talk to you until now." "Mark, couldn't you have left on Saturday afternoon?" "Anne, I couldn't, Mark. Mick drove us all over town on Saturday." "Mark, what about today?" "Anne, my sister came for the weekend. I just can't leave her. We haven't seen each other for months." "Mark, well, I feel stupid sitting in the lake house all day waiting for you." "Anne, don't you ever think about anything but yourself?" "Mark, okay, I think it's clear how important I am to you." "Anne, let's not fight about this. Listen, I have to go. I don't want Mac to catch me off guard." Their conversation delighted me. It seemed that their disappointment was about to boil over, and I felt that I had dealt their relationship a serious blow. One could hope that this would be enough. After looking at their email on Monday, I found confirmation of my assessment. "Mark, are we still going to meet this week?" "Anne, I don't think so, Mark. This is all getting too troublesome, and it's starting to annoy me. Besides, Mac has been really nice to me lately, and I feel pretty guilty about running to you behind his back. I think we need to get this over with." "Mark, don't say that, Anne. At least one more time." "Anne, no. I'm serious. It's over." "Mark, Well, I can't say I'm not disappointed. You're still an attractive lady, but I know what you're talking about. Maybe it's for the best. I don't want to lose Bobby either. But I hope we can still be friends. And, of course, we will remain friends, just not friends with privileges. Success. I managed to bring enough problems into their relationship that they collapsed. Now, I had only to complete the second part of my plan. When Anne returned home that evening, she was sullen and absent-minded. Once or twice, I even thought I saw tears in her eyes. I didn't want to interfere, but I felt I shouldn't completely ignore her behavior. "Are you okay, baby?" I asked solicitously. "Looks like you're in a bad mood today. Are you having problems at work?" "It's okay," she said, not looking at me. "I guess I'm just in a bad mood." I nodded and gave her some time to recover. But I was secretly gloating because I was sure she was mourning the end of her relationship with Mark. Despite the fact that it was her decision to end the affair, I knew that Anne puts a lot of emotions into any relationship and cannot end them without some sense of loss. For myself, I found her mood calming. She wouldn't have felt so sad if she hadn't decided to end it. But I couldn't help thinking that Mark was unlikely to have a similar reaction. "He's probably sleeping with Bobby right now," I thought sarcastically. The next morning, Anne was in a much better emotional state. During the day, I didn't see any more letters between Mark and her, which strengthened my confidence that neither of them had changed their minds. It gave me a growing sense of triumph. Everything was going as I had planned. That evening after dinner, when Anne came into the study, I was again holding an Edgar Allan Poe book on my lap. "What are you reading this time? What is it?" she asked. "One of my favorites," I told her, "is The Cask of Amontillado." "I do not know that," she said. Then she snuggled up to me. "Can I interrupt you for a minute? I just wanted you to know what a wonderful husband I have," she said seriously, looking into my eyes. "You've been so nice to me for the last few weeks, and I feel very lucky to have you." My heart soared at these words, and I realized that I had won. This is the moment I've been waiting for. I looked at her, waiting for her to say something else. She paused, and for a moment I saw an expression similar to guilt flash across her face. Her eyes seemed to moisten a little. "I really don't deserve you," she said fervently. "No," I said calmly. "I don't deserve you." Then he reached for the desk drawer. "And I certainly didn't deserve it," I said sharply, throwing photos of her meeting Mark at the motel into her lap. At first, she looked at me in confusion because of the change in my tone, and then she hardly understood what I gave her. But when she focused on the frames and found out what they depicted, she began to wail. "Oh my God, no, no!" I handed her a copy of the divorce application that my lawyer had filed earlier that day. When she realized what I had given her, her breath caught in her throat. "But I thought you and me. I mean, isn't there some way?" "No," I interrupted her coldly, handing her another sheaf of papers. "And in case you're interested in Mark, here's a copy of the letter I sent to Bobby tonight along with the detective's report. I also sent a similar letter to your sister Miriam, explaining why I am divorcing you." She moaned in pain and sobbed again. "I just don't understand. You've been so loving and caring all these weeks. I can't believe you're so cruel right now. Does all this mean nothing?" "My dear," I said evenly, "when you started your little romance, you put an end to all my love for you. That's why I've spent the last few weeks trying to end your relationship with Mark. As for how I treated you, well, I wanted to make sure that you would understand how much you lost when you betrayed me. My goal was to take away from you. My goal was to take away from you the same thing that you took from me. And as far as I can tell, my plan worked perfectly." Anne collapsed on the sofa, sobbing piteously. Before I left, I put the Poe storybook I was reading on top of the rest of the documents. The text was still open on the cask of Amontillado, and I used a marker to mark the passage containing the motto of the Montresor family. No one dishonors me with impunity,